My daughter told me her stepfather would be walking her down the aisle because he was more of a father than I ever was. I respected her choice with a calm smile. Then I made a single phone call and canceled the $100,000 wedding venue I had paid for, as the father of the bride had officially withdrawn. Before we dive into this intense story, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. We'd also love to know where you're all tuning in from. Let us know in the comments. The crisp white tablecloth felt like a surrender flag between us. I had chosen this restaurant, La Lumiere, for its soft lighting and hushed atmosphere, imagining a celebratory dinner. I'd expected to go over floral arrangements or debate the merits of a string quartet versus a live band. For a month, ever since I'd signed the check that secured the Crestwood estate for my daughter's wedding, my mind had been a happy collage of these pleasant, fatherly duties. Anna, my daughter, my only child, sat opposite me. At 26, she was a perfect, breathtaking blend of her mother's grace and, I like to think, my own stubborn chin. She stirred her iced tea, the little spoon clinking a nervous rhythm against the glass. She hadn't touched her appetizer. "Is everything all right, sweetheart?" I asked, keeping my voice gentle. "You seem a million miles away." She looked up, her blue eyes, usually so bright and full of life, were clouded with something I couldn't quite decipher. It looked like guilt, but it was barricaded behind a wall of defensiveness. "Dad, I need to talk to you about something. It's about the wedding." "Of course," I said, leaning forward eagerly. "Anything. Is it the caterer? Your mother mentioned you were having second thoughts about the menu." "No, it's not the caterer," she said, placing her spoon down with a decisive click. She took a deep breath and the wall in her eyes grew a little higher. "It's about the walk, down the aisle." A cold, heavy stillness settled in my chest. I suddenly felt as if I were encased in ice, a perfect stillness that preceded a catastrophic shatter. I knew, with the primal instinct of a parent, exactly where this was going. I had spent a decade watching this train approach from a great distance, and now it was finally arriving at the station. "Okay," I said slowly, my voice a stranger to my own ears. "I've asked David to do it," she said, the words coming out in a rush, as if saying them quickly would lessen their impact. "I want him to be the one to walk me down the aisle." David, her stepfather, a history teacher who could diagram the Peloponnesian War but had never had to figure out how to cover a payroll for 50 employees during a recession. A man who had entered our lives on a foundation I had built, in a house I had paid for, to comfort a wife I had failed to make happy. I didn't speak. I couldn't. The silence stretched, filled only by the distant murmur of other, happier families celebrating birthdays and anniversaries. I felt the gazes of 1,000 ghosts, the ghosts of missed school plays, of bedtime stories cut short by conference calls, of parent-teacher conferences I'd attended via speakerphone from a hotel room in another time zone. All the sacrifices I had made, all the brutal hours I had worked, I had done so under the righteous belief that I was being a provider, a good father. I was building a kingdom for my princess. I thought she understood that. "Dad, please say something," she whispered, her defensiveness starting to crumble into a plea. Finally, I found my voice. It was hollow, but it was steady. "Why, Anna?" She flinched as if the simple question were an accusation. "Because he was there," she said, her voice gaining a rehearsed strength. It was a line, I realized, that she had practiced in the mirror, a line her mother, Alina, had likely fed her for years. "He was at my soccer games. He helped me with my history homework. He taught me how to drive. He's been more of a father to me than you ever were." Each word was a perfectly sharpened blade, expertly inserted between my ribs. "More of a father." The phrase echoed in the cavern of my chest. It didn't matter that I had paid for the soccer league, the history textbooks, the car she learned to drive in. It didn't matter that the time David had in abundance was a luxury bought and paid for by my absence. In the simple, emotional accounting of a child's heart, presence had trumped provision. I looked at my daughter, this beautiful young woman I adored, and saw a stranger looking back at me, her eyes reflecting a narrative I had never been allowed to co-author. The kingdom I had built was a gilded cage in her eyes. The sacrifices were seen as abandonment. My heart, which had felt so full of pride and anticipation just moments before, was now a desolate, empty space. But amidst the wreckage, a cold, quiet clarity began to form. An engineer's clarity. When a structure is declared unsound, you don't keep pretending it can bear a load. You condemn it. I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. Her skin was cool. I gave her a small, sad smile. It was the most genuine thing I could offer. "It's your day, sweetheart," I said, and the calmness in my own voice surprised me. "It's your wedding. Your happiness is all that matters. I respect your decision." Relief washed over her face, so pure and immediate that it was almost as painful as the initial blow. She thought that was it. She thought my love was unconditional in the way she defined it, a blank check, emotional or otherwise, with no expectation of reciprocity. She squeezed my hand. "Thank you, Dad. I knew you'd understand." But she didn't know me at all. And as I sat there, absorbing the full impact of her choice, I understood with a chilling certainty that the betrayal was infinitely worse than any argument or fleeting disappointment. It was a fundamental redefinition of my role in her life. And roles, I knew, had terms and conditions. The drive home was a blur. The familiar city lights smeared into streaks of indifferent color. My house, a large colonial I'd bought 2 decades ago because Alina had said it had good bones and was in the best school district, felt cavernous and cold when I walked in. It was a place designed for a family, but now its vast emptiness only served to echo my solitude. I walked into my study, the one room that was truly mine, lined with mahogany bookshelves filled with texts on structural engineering, physics, and urban planning. On my desk, next to a blueprint for a new municipal bridge, sat a framed photo of a 7-year-old Anna, gap-toothed and beaming, holding up a finger painting she'd made for me. The inscription on the back in her clumsy, childish print read, "To the best daddy in the world." I sank into my leather chair, the cool material a stark contrast to the fire in my chest. I replayed the conversation in the restaurant over and over, each word a fresh torment. He was there. The phrase was a hammer chipping away at the foundation of my identity. For 30 years, I had defined my worth by my work, by my ability to provide, to build, to secure. I wasn't a man of soft words or idle hours. I was a man of action, of results. My love was expressed in mortgage payments, in tuition checks, in the silent, humming security of a life free from financial want. I had believed so naively that this was the highest form of fatherhood, to build a fortress for your family and stand tireless guard at its walls. I never realized that my daughter was living inside that fortress, peering through the battlements and wishing I were in the courtyard with her, teaching her how to ride a bike. David had been in the courtyard. He'd had the time. I had paid for the courtyard. My phone buzzed on the desk, a text from Anna. "Found the most perfect shoes to go with my dress. Tism for dinner, Dad. Love you." Tism, thank you so much. The casual, abbreviated gratitude felt like a sprinkle of salt on a gaping wound. The sheer, blissful ignorance of her message was staggering. She had just fundamentally redefined my existence in her life, demoted me from a starring role to a walk-on part, and now she was texting me about shoes. She saw me not as a father to be honored, but as a wallet to be thanked. I stared at the phone, my thumb hovering over the keypad. What could I even say? My instinct was to rage, to list every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every ounce of pressure I'd endured for her sake. I wanted to scream that David's presence was a luxury underwritten by my absence. But what good would it do? The narrative was already written, its ink long dry. Alina had been the author and Anna the faithful reader. A profound weariness settled over me. It was heavier than any exhaustion I'd ever felt after a 70-hour work week. This was a soul-deep fatigue. I had lost. I had played the game by the only rules I knew, and I had lost. But as I sat there in the silent tomb of my study, the engineer in me began to stir. Grief gave way to a cold, hard logic. I was a man who dealt in facts, in the unyielding laws of physics and the precise language of contracts. Emotions were fluid and unreliable, but principles were rigid. Load-bearing walls, tensional strength, contractual obligations. Anna had made her choice based on her emotional truth. She was entitled to that. But I was entitled to react based on my own set of truths. The truth of my role, the truth of my contribution, the truth of what was written, in black and white, on page 12 of a very expensive contract. A thought clear and sharp as a diamond cut through the fog of my pain. She had forgotten who I was, not just a father but an engineer, a man who lives by the structural integrity of things, contracts, promises, and roles. In her world, father of the bride was a sentimental title, a lovely honorific to be bestowed upon the man who made her feel the most loved. In my world, it was a legal designation, a client, a signatory with specific rights and responsibilities, and she had just informed me in no uncertain terms that I did not hold that title. I picked up the picture of my gap-toothed little girl. I missed that child with an ache that was physical, but she was gone. In her place was a woman who had made a choice, and I, her father, would now make mine. The roots of this bitter harvest were planted 12 years ago, in the sterile, overly polite environment of a mediator's office. The divorce from a leaner had been, on the surface, remarkably civilized. No shouting matches, no slammed doors. Just the quiet, relentless erosion of a marriage worn down by two fundamentally incompatible worldviews. I met a leaner in college. She was an art history major, brilliant and passionate, who spoke of beauty and feeling. I was a structural engineering student who spoke of tensile strength and load distribution. In the beginning, our differences were a source of fascination. She softened my hard edges. I gave her a sense of stability. We were in love. We built a life. We had Anna. And then reality set in. To give my family the life Alina envisioned, the beautiful house, the European vacations, the private schools, I had to work. Not just work, but build. I started my own engineering firm with 2 partners and a mountain of debt. The first 5 years were brutal. I worked from sunrise until long after my daughter was asleep. I'd come home smelling of concrete dust and exhaustion, and Alina would be waiting, her disappointment a palpable presence in the room. "You missed her ballet recital," she'd say, her voice quiet but edged with steel. "She kept looking for you in the audience." "I know, Ellie. The presentation for the city council ran late. This bridge contract could set us up for the next decade," I'd explain, holding out my hands as if to show her the invisible weight I carried. "It's always a contract, William. It's always a meeting. What about us? What about your daughter?" She couldn't see that the contracts were for them. The meetings were for Anna. Every long hour, every missed event was a brick I was laying in the foundation of their security. In my mind, I was a hero, slaying dragons in boardrooms and on construction sites. In her eyes, I was just an absent husband and a ghost of a father. When we divorced, I didn't fight her on anything. She got the house. I would continue paying the mortgage until it was paid off. She got a generous alimony agreement. My only condition was that Anna's life would not change. Her school, her lessons, her future, all of it would be secure. I would ensure it. A year later, David entered the picture. He was everything I was. A high school history teacher, he was home by 4 o'clock every day. His weekends were free. He could talk to Anna about the Renaissance, help her build a diorama of the Globe Theater, and be there in the front row for every single school event. He was present. He was available. Alina wasted no time in cementing the narrative. Every conversation with Anna became a masterclass in subtle manipulation. "Isn't it wonderful that David can take you to your driving lesson? Your father is probably in a meeting in Tokyo right now. David and I will be at your debate tournament. Don't worry about your dad. He's so busy with that new stadium project. He sent a check for the team's travel expenses, though. That was nice of him. The money was always mentioned, framed not as support but as a transaction, a guilt payment. I was reduced to a walking, talking ATM, a distant benefactor whose love was measured in wire transfers. David, meanwhile, was canonized. He was the one who shared his time, his hobbies, his attention. He reaped the rewards of the life I funded, and in return, all he had to do was show up. I don't even think David was malicious. He was just a passive man, happy to be cast as the hero in a leaner's drama. He enjoyed the role of the beloved stepfather, the fun parent, and he never once thought to correct the record. He never once sat Anna down and said, "Your father works incredibly hard so that we can have this life. His absence is a sacrifice." Why would he? He was getting all the benefits with none of the responsibility. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when Anna announced her engagement. I was overjoyed. My little girl was getting married. I sat her down, just the two of us, and told her my plan. "I want to give you the wedding of your dreams," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Whatever you want, no budget, just tell me what will make you happy." She had cried, throwing her arms around my neck. "Thank you, Daddy," she'd sobbed. It was the first time she'd called me that in years. And so I dove in. I found the Crestwood Estate, a breathtaking venue of rolling hills and old-world stone architecture that cost a fortune. I met with the coordinator, a crisp, efficient woman named Ms. Albright. I signed the contract, my hand steady as I wrote out the check for the full $100,000 deposit. On the signature line below my name, I proudly wrote my title, Father of the Bride. It was, I thought, the ultimate expression of my love, the culmination of a lifetime of work. I was giving my daughter a fairy tale day, a memory that would last a lifetime. I was the provider, the protector, the father making it all possible. And now, sitting in my silent study, I saw the truth. To Anna and Alina, it wasn't a fairy tale gift from a loving father. It was just another transaction, the biggest one yet. They had accepted the money, but they had given the honor, the role itself, to someone else. They believed they could have it both ways. They believed the foundation could stand even after they had removed the cornerstone. They were about to get a lesson in structural integrity. For 2 days I did nothing. I let the pain wash over me, allowing myself to fully experience the grief of the situation. I went to work, moved through my meetings like an automaton, my mind 1,000 miles away. I was processing, analyzing, running emotional diagnostics. By the third day, the grief had cooled and hardened into something else, resolve, a cold, quiet determination that settled deep in my bones. I was no longer a victim of my daughter's decision. I was a man who was about to make one of his own. That Saturday morning, I didn't go to the office. Instead, I walked into my study, the sun streaming through the large window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I went to the filing cabinet in the corner, a heavy, fireproof steel vault where I kept the important documents of my life. I spun the combination lock and pulled open the heavy drawer. Inside, nestled between property deeds and my own will, was a thick, pristine file folder labeled simply, Anna's Wedding. I placed the folder on my desk and opened it. Inside, clipped neatly to the top, was the contract for the Crestwood Estate. It was 20 pages of dense legalese, but I had read every word before signing it. In fact, I'd had my firm's top lawyer, a man who specialized in ironclad construction contracts, review it for me. He'd made a few small additions, standard practice for any significant financial commitment I made. I flipped through the pages, my fingers tracing the lines of text until I found what I was looking for. Page 12, Section 8B, Client Obligations and Fulfillment. My lawyer had drafted the clause himself. It was designed to protect me, a standard contingency he put in all my personal agreements. It read, "The client, herein identified as William Carter, father of the bride, provides all funds and considerations for this event based on the good faith understanding and fulfillment of his role and title as recognized by the wedding party. All financial obligations of the client to the vendor, the Crestwood estate, are contingent upon the formal recognition and execution of his role as father of the bride during the contracted event. Should this role be formally reassigned or denied, the client reserves the right to declare this contract null and void due to a failure of consideration. Notice of such declaration must be given no less than 90 days prior to the event date for a full refund of all deposits paid. The wedding was still 5 months away, well over 90 days. It was a beautiful clause, precise, unambiguous. It was a piece of high-tensile legal steel woven into the fabric of the agreement. It turned an emotional role into a contractual obligation. And Anna, with her heartfelt, devastating speech, had formally notified me of the breach. I sat back in my chair, the contract lying open on the desk. This was the turning point. This was the moment I stopped being a passenger in the unfolding drama of my life and took the wheel. I was not going to be relegated to the role of a silent, smiling checkbook in the background of my own daughter's life. My contribution, my very identity as her father, had been dismissed. Very well, then my contribution would be withdrawn. I picked up the phone on my desk and dialed the number for the Crestwood estate, which was printed at the top of the contract. After a few rings, a polite, professional voice answered. "Good morning, the Crestwood estate. This is Catherine speaking. How may I help you?" "Good morning, Catherine. My name is William Carter. I'd like to speak with Ms. Albright, please. I'm the client for the Carter-Thompson wedding next August." "Of course, Mr. Carter. Please hold one moment." The line clicked, and a moment later the crisp, no-nonsense voice of the wedding coordinator came on. "William, how lovely to hear from you. Is everything all right?" "Everything is fine, Ms. Albright," I said, my voice even and calm. "I'm calling regarding the contract. I need to invoke the cancellation clause under Section 8B. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint rustle of papers as she, no doubt, pulled up my file. Section 8B, one moment. Another pause, longer this time. I imagined her reading the carefully crafted words of my lawyer. "Mr. Carter, it says here, this is contingent on your role as father of the bride. Has something changed?" "Yes," I said simply. "I have been formally notified by my daughter that I will not be serving in that capacity. The role has been reassigned. Therefore, as per the contract, the fundamental consideration for my financial backing has been breached. I am officially withdrawing as the client and rescinding all funds." The silence on the other end of the line was profound. Ms. Albright was a professional who had likely dealt with every conceivable form of wedding drama, bridezillas, budget issues, cold feet. But this, I wagered, was a new one. "Mr. Carter, I understand," she finally said, her voice strained. "This is highly unusual. The cancellation will mean the date is released and all our services are terminated. We will, of course, honor the contract and issue a full refund of your deposit. Do you want me to be the one to inform the bride?" The question hung in the air. This was my last chance to turn back, to soften the blow. I could call Anna myself, try to explain. But no, the decision was made. The consequences had to be as clean and direct as the action itself. The system had to be allowed to work. "Yes, Ms. Albright," I said. "That would be the appropriate professional channel. You are her point of contact. Thank you for your understanding." "Very well, Mr. Carter. I will make the call." I hung up the phone and stared out the window. The sun was higher in the sky now. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vengeful. I felt a strange, quiet peace. I had taken a stand, not with yelling or pleading, but with the tools I knew best: logic, precision, and the unassailable power of a well-written contract. The foundation had been declared unsound, and I had just posted the condemnation notice. 3 days passed, 3 days of deafening silence. I knew the call was coming. It was like waiting for a storm to break after the sky has turned a bruised, ominous purple. Every time my phone rang, my stomach tightened. I went about my work, my focus absolute, channeling all my energy into the precise, logical world of blueprints and stress calculations. It was a refuge from the emotional chaos I had unleashed. The call finally came on Wednesday evening. I was in my kitchen making a simple dinner when my phone screen lit up with Anna's picture. I took a deep breath, set my knife down, and answered. "Hello, Anna." "Dad," her voice was a choked, panicked sob. "Dad, what did you do?" I leaned against the kitchen counter, my posture calm, my voice steady. "I'm not sure what you mean." "The venue, the Crestwood. Ms. Albright called me, she said. She said the booking was canceled. She said you withdrew the funds. How could you do that? It was a gift. You promised." The accusation of a broken promise stung, but I held my ground. "I promised to provide you with a wedding, Anna. The contract for that specific venue, however, was predicated on a specific role. A role you told me I no longer held." There was a sputtering, incredulous sound on the other end. "Because I asked David to walk me down the aisle. That's it. You're ruining my wedding because of that. I can't believe how petty you're being." "This isn't about being petty," I said, my voice losing none of its calm. "It's about respect. The title father of the bride isn't just a nice name, Anna, it's a position. It implies a certain relationship, a certain honor. The $100,000 was an investment in that position. When you gave the position to someone else, you forfeited the investment that came with it. It's that simple." "Simple? You think this is simple?" she shrieked, her panic escalating into fury. "We have contracts with caterers, with florists. We have save-the-dates sent out with that venue on them. You've destroyed everything." Suddenly another voice cut in, sharp and venomous. It was a leaner. "Give me the phone, Anna." There was a brief rustling sound. "William, you listen to me, you cruel, manipulative man. How dare you do this to your daughter? After everything you've put her through, all the years of neglect, this is how you behave. By holding money over her head." Ah, there it was, the true author of the narrative. Her voice was dripping with years of stored-up resentment. "Hello, Alina," I said, my tone remaining placid. "This has nothing to do with you." "It has everything to do with me," she screeched. "You're trying to punish her for loving David, for recognizing the man who was actually there for her when you were off playing big shot CEO." "I was never playing Alina," I replied, a hint of steel entering my voice. "I.W. as working. I was funding the very life that allowed David the freedom to be there. You seem to have conveniently forgotten that part of the equation over the years. Money, money, money. It's all you know, it's your answer to everything. You think you can buy your daughter's love, and now you're trying to buy her loyalty. Well, it won't work. We don't need you. We don't need your blood money." Her rage was so pure, so potent, it was almost impressive. Her mask of civilized co-parenting had not just slipped, it had been incinerated. This was the raw, unfiltered bitterness she had been carefully feeding our daughter for more than a decade. And in her fury, she was confirming everything. She was proving my point more effectively than I ever could. "Is that so?" I asked quietly. "If you don't need my money, then there shouldn't be a problem. I'm sure David will be more than happy to step up and provide the funds for the venue. After all, he's fulfilling the role. It's only fair that he should assume the responsibilities that come with it." A dead silence met my words. It was a checkmate. Alina had no response. The entire premise of her argument, that my money was tainted and unnecessary, had just collided with the hard reality of a six-figure price tag. I could practically hear the gears grinding in her head as she tried to reconcile her righteous indignation with her complete inability to solve the problem. "You are a monster," she finally whispered, her voice devoid of its earlier fire, filled only with a hollow, defeated hatred. "No, Alina," I said, my voice softening with a sad finality. "I'm just a father who has finally decided that his role is worth more than just the ink on his checks. The decision was Anna's. The consequences are now hers to manage. I have nothing more to say." I ended the call before she could respond. I stood in the quiet of my kitchen, my heart pounding in my chest. The first confrontation was over. The initial shockwave had hit. I felt no joy, only a profound sense of sorrow. It was one thing to be betrayed by a daughter I loved. It was another to have it confirmed so explicitly that her mother was the one who had handed her the knife. The week that followed the phone call was a masterclass in frantic, impotent desperation. I knew, through the grapevine of mutual acquaintances, that Alina and Anna were in full panic mode. They were scrambling, calling every upscale venue within a 100-mile radius, only to be met with the same two responses. "We are fully booked for the next 18 months, or a price quote that was so far beyond their means it was laughable. David, the man of the hour, the real father, was suddenly confronted with a reality his teacher's salary could never accommodate. I could picture the scene. Alina, demanding he do something. Anna looking at him with pleading, expectant eyes. And David, a man whose greatest financial decision was likely choosing between a sedan and a small SUV, shuffling his feet and explaining that his life savings might cover the cost of the floral arrangements, but certainly not the entire castle. The financial reality of their principles was beginning to set in, and it was a harsh, unforgiving tutor. The life of comfort that Anna had always known, the one she took for granted, had been so seamless and invisible that she never once considered its source. She lived in a beautiful, sturdy house without ever thinking about the architect who designed it or the builders who laid its foundation. Now, for the first time, she was being forced to look at the blueprints. Her fiancé, a pleasant young architect named Tom, was caught in the crossfire. He was a good man, but he was just starting his career. His family was comfortable, but not in a position to drop $100,000 on a wedding venue at a moment's notice. I heard he tried to reason with them, suggesting they scale back, find a more modest location. But Alina, her pride wounded, would hear none of it. For her, the lavish wedding was a status symbol, a way to show the world and me that she had won. Scaling back would be an admission of defeat. Anna, I imagined, was caught in a terrible emotional vice. On one side was the narrative she had embraced for a decade, that her father was cold and distant, and her stepfather was the warm, loving presence in her life. On the other side was the undeniable, catastrophic evidence that the loving presence could not provide the dream, while the cold and distant father had made it possible with a single stroke of his pen and taken it away with a single phone call. She was being forced to compare the two men not by their emotional availability, but by the fundamental nature of their contribution to her life. David had given her his time. I had given her a world of opportunity. She had always believed the former was more valuable. Now, faced with the collapse of the most important day of her life, she was no longer so sure. The pressure built until it could no longer be contained. Late on a Friday afternoon, my secretary buzzed me. "Mr. Carter, your ex-wife is on line 1. She says it's an emergency." I sighed, "Put her through, Janet." Alina's voice was different this time. The shrieking rage was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating tone. "William, we need to talk, all of us, in person." "I believe I've said all I need to say, Alina." "No," she snapped. "You made this mess and we are going to fix it. My house. Sunday, 2 o'clock, you will be there." It wasn't a request, it was a command. She was trying to reassert control, to bring the battle to her home turf. A year ago, I would have acquiesced just to keep the peace, but I was no longer that man. "No," I said calmly. "If there is to be a meeting, it will be here, at my house. The house Anna grew up in. Sunday at 2. David and Anna are welcome. You can decide if you want to be there or not." I was reclaiming the territory, forcing them to come to the place where my contributions were written into the very walls, visible in every photograph on the mantel. There was a long pause. "Fine," she spat and hung up. The case was being built, not in a courtroom but in my daughter's mind. Each panicked phone call, each budgetary dead end, each uncomfortable conversation with David was a new piece of evidence being submitted. The trial was approaching its climax, and the final arguments were about to be heard. I could only pray that the jury, A jury of one, my daughter, was finally ready to listen to the truth. Sunday arrived, gray and overcast, the sky mirroring the mood that had settled over my life. At precisely 2 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find the three of them standing on my porch. Elena, her face a mask of rigid fury. David, looking deeply uncomfortable, his eyes fixed on his shoes. And Anna, who stood slightly behind them, her face pale and her eyes red-rimmed and full of a terrible, conflicted sorrow. I stepped back and gestured them into the living room. It was the formal room, the one we rarely used when we were a family. It felt appropriate now. They sat on the damask sofa, a united front of grievance. I took the large armchair opposite them, the physical distance a clear boundary. Elena, as expected, led the charge. She didn't even wait for them to fully settle. "All right, William, you've made your point," she began, her voice dripping with condescension. "You've punished Anna, you've terrified her, you've proven you can still throw your weight around. Are you happy now? Can we end this ridiculous game so my daughter can have the wedding she deserves?" I didn't look at Elena. My gaze was fixed entirely on my daughter. "This isn't a game," I said, my voice quiet but carrying across the room. "And I'm not interested in speaking with your mother, Anna. I'm interested in speaking with you." Anna flinched, looking to her mother as if for a cue. Eleanor's jaw tightened. David shifted uncomfortably on the couch, a man completely out of his depth. "Dad, just call them back," Anna pleaded, her voice barely a whisper. "Please, just reverse it. We can talk about everything else later." "No," I said gently. "We can't, because the everything else is the entire point." I leaned forward, my hands clasped in front of me. I did not raise my voice. I did not let anger or bitterness color my tone. I spoke with the calm, measured precision of an engineer explaining a complex design. "When you were 8, I began, my eyes locked on hers, "you wanted to learn piano. The lessons were expensive, and the grand piano your mother insisted you have cost more than my car. I took on a side project in Delaware, a 2-month contract, and drove back and forth every weekend so I could afford it. I paid for that piano." Anna's eyes widened slightly. "When you were 14, you needed braces. It was cosmetic, but you were self-conscious about your smile. The orthodontist bill was thousands of dollars. That was the year I sold my shares in a small tech startup I'd invested in. I used the profits to pay for your braces, and the rest went into a college fund. I paid for that smile." I could see David staring at me, a look of dawning comprehension on his face. Elena shot him a warning glance. "When you were 17, you fell in love with a liberal arts college on the East Coast, a private school with a tuition that was astronomical. David advised you to look at state schools. Your mother said we should take out loans. I worked for 18 straight months, overseeing the most difficult project of my career, the seismic retrofitting of the Bay Bridge to ensure you could go to the school of your dreams and graduate without a single dollar of debt. I paid for that education." Tears were now silently streaming down Anna's face. She wasn't sobbing, just weeping with the quiet, dawning horror of understanding. "I paid for your first car. I paid the deposit on your first apartment. I have paid for the very ground beneath your feet your entire life, Anna. I did not do it because I wanted to thank you. I did it because I am your father, and because that is my language of love. It is the only language I was ever taught. My love was not in the bedtime stories I was too tired to read. It was in the foundation of the house that kept you safe at night. It was in every brick, every bill, every opportunity your mother and David and you took for granted." I finally paused, letting the weight of my words settle in the silent room. "I have never, not once, failed to provide for you. I have never asked for anything in return. The one time in your entire life, I looked forward to the public recognition of my role, to stand beside you for 5 minutes as the man who built your world. You gave that honor to someone else. You told me my presence wasn't required, so I removed it, all of it." I leaned back in my chair. You can't have the foundation, Anna, and deny the man who built it. It doesn't work. The structure will not hold. The room was utterly still. Alina sat speechless, her face ashen. The narrative she had so carefully constructed for a decade had just been systematically dismantled, piece by painful piece. David stared at the floor, the picture of shame. He was a good man, but he was not a provider on this scale, and he knew it. But my focus was on Anna. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a universe of regret. The wall between us, the one built by her mother's resentment and her own youthful misunderstanding, had crumbled into dust. She was seeing me, really seeing me for the first time. She stood up, her legs unsteady, and took a step toward me. She bypassed her mother completely. "Dad," she choked out, the word a raw, open wound. I am so sorry. I didn't know. I never understood." And in that moment, I knew I had not lost my daughter. I had finally got her back. The aftermath of that Sunday meeting was a quiet, seismic shift in the landscape of our family. Alina left my house in a storm of silent fury, dragging a bewildered and chastened David behind her. She had lost control of the narrative, and for a woman like her, that was the ultimate defeat. Their relationship, I later learned, became strained. The perfect image of the heroic replacement family had been fractured, and the cracks were starting to show. But my concern was not for them, it was for Anna. She stayed behind after they left, sinking onto the ottoman at my feet, her head bowed in shame. We sat in silence for a long time, the only sound her quiet, shuddering breaths. There were no more arguments to be made, no more points to prove. There was only the quiet, fragile space for healing to begin. "I was so wrong, Dad," she whispered to the carpet. "Mom always said, she made it sound like you were just sending money because you felt guilty, like it was easier than being there. I never thought about what it cost you." I reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder. "It cost me time with you, Anna. That's a price I can never get back. I made my own mistakes. I hid behind my work because it was what I was good at. I should have tried harder to speak your language, not just my own." It was the first time we had ever spoken with such raw honesty. It was painful, but it was clean. It was real. In the weeks that followed, the lavish wedding to Tom was officially canceled. All the deposits they had made to other vendors were, thankfully, small enough for them to absorb the loss. There was no more talk of the Crestwood estate. The dream wedding had evaporated, and in its place was a stark reality. Anna came to see me alone a week later. She was humbled, her usual bright confidence replaced with a quiet introspection. She apologized again, more formally this time, for the pain she had caused. "I don't deserve your help," she said, looking me straight in the eye. "But I want to ask you for something more important. I want to ask for your time. I want to start over." And so we did. I didn't just write another check. That would have undermined the entire lesson. Instead, I made a different offer. "Let's plan a new wedding," I said. "A smaller one, something beautiful and meaningful. We'll set a realistic budget and you, me, and Tom will plan it together. I will help you, but you will be involved in every decision, every line item. You will see what it means to build something." A new light entered her eyes. It wasn't the giddy excitement of being given a blank check, but the quiet joy of being invited into a partnership. Over the next 3 months, we planned a new wedding. We found a lovely historic inn with a beautiful garden. It wasn't a castle, but it was intimate and warm. Anna, a talented graphic designer, created all the invitations herself. Tom, the architect, designed the layout for the garden ceremony. And I, the engineer, managed the boo. Get and the vendors, explaining every contract and every cost to them. We became a team. I learned more about my daughter over those 3 months than I had in the previous 10 years. I learned about her work, her fears, her dreams. She learned about the pressures I faced, the complexities of my business, and the quiet pride I took in my ability to create and provide. The wedding took place on a crisp, sunny October day. It was perfect, not because it was lavish, but because it was authentic. It was a celebration built not on a fantasy, but on a newfound foundation of truth and mutual respect. When the time came, I stood at the back of the garden, my daughter on my arm. She looked up at me, her eyes shining with love and a wisdom she hadn't possessed 6 months prior. "Are you ready?" I whispered. She squeezed my arm, "More than you know, Dad." And as I walked my daughter down the aisle, I felt a sense of peace and fulfillment that no $100,000 venue could ever buy. I hadn't just paid for a wedding. We had built one, together.